Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have Sarah with us and Yvonne. Today, we're going to be talking about blending, segmenting, spelling, and introducing decodable readers.
Yeah. And through the session, Sarah will be giving us her wise and wonderful words about the decodables because she wrote them. Who better to have the person to explain them? And Jen will be navigating all your questions that you may have. If they're really long questions, we might leave them to the end. And one thing that we need to mention is there are no certificates with this session, as we have up to about 1,000 people joining, and it's becoming a big administrative task trying to deal with this. So Jen will remind people as we go along if they're late joining. And Sarah, hello.
Good afternoon.
And where are you positioned in the world, Sarah?
Uh, I'm in good old sunny Suffolk this afternoon. And we do actually have a little bit of sun, which is lovely because we've had an awful lot of rain recently.
That we have. And Jen, where are you?
I'm in quite cold Montreal. It's not sunny today. It's snowing, which is always beautiful. But I don't mind the snow as long as there's sunshine, which unfortunately today there's not.
No. Well, we're going to get started with the presentation. And as I mentioned, we have Jen, who will be managing the chat and also joining in with the conversations that we have. And Sarah will be giving us all the information we need to see how we can use decodables in different ways. Because, Sarah, they're just not a reading book, are they?
Well, that is their first and foremost reason for being in life, but they are a very useful resource. And obviously, we bought them all. We've got them in our classrooms, and there are a lot more things that we can do with them than read them once and pop them back on the shelf.
Yeah. And the one thing that we know about the decodables, they're used all around the world. So some of you have already put where you're from, but if you've got an emoji flag, let's have a look. If you have already put where you're from, that's lovely. But if you haven't, let's see where you are. There's some that I recognize, and we have Annette, who's from Australia and Portugal. We have people from Namibia and Cape Town. Um, where are you all from? Japan, which is absolutely excellent, Miramar. And here we go. Look at all these people from all around the world. So we welcome you, and it's always lovely to be able to share and get exchanges from you because we learn, don't we, ladies, when we have these webinars?
Mhm.
Always.
Always. Okay, so welcome to the session. And what is in the session? So we're going to look at the differences between standard readers and decodable readers because there are differences. And also, where do the decodable readers fit within our program? And this is a question we get asked a lot. So you're in the right place for the right answers. And also, are they ability based rather than age based? That's another question we get asked because many readers, I think you'll agree, Sarah, they can be banded to an age or to go with a particular scheme. Isn't that right? And we'll be talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And what we can do with decodable readers, and there are so many other things you could do with them. As Sarah said, primarily there to assist with reading, but we're going to touch on other things that can be done. And this is one about spelling. Now, how can children practice spelling? So you'll find out how we're going to cover all these topics in a wonderful hour where we're hoping that you will participate as well. So, firstly, what is Jolly Phonics? It's a wonderful, fast-paced program where children are using the 42 sounds of the English language. The one great thing about the program is it's flexible and adaptable to fit in with your school setting, curriculum, and also ages. And I think Sarah will tell you, having traveled to the far ends of the world recently, we just saw how well it fits in, even with children with English as a second language. Isn't that correct, Sarah?
yeah, absolutely. And that applies not only to far and exotic flung places that we might have been to in the last year, but increasingly, even within the UK and other places, our town cities are becoming increasingly multicultural, and many of our schools in big cities actually have a vast number of languages spoken within them as mother tongues.
Yeah. And I think bearing that in mind, this is where the lesson plans that are provided both in Jolly Classroom and with the teacher's book assist you greatly. And of course, Sarah, you were a teacher. So it's developed by teachers for teachers because we know how stressful it can be. And as I've mentioned, it is totally adaptable. And this also extends to Jolly Classroom. But what we do know is that having this structured program, it gives you the pathway so that children have a trajectory, but where we know where they're going to get to. So everything that is built around all these lessons with the resources and the materials are giving you all you need to have a perfect lesson and address all the children's learning styles in a multisensory and kinesthetic way. And it's not only children with additional language, but also children with SEND. Isn't that correct, Sarah?
Absolutely. There's very little reason, you shouldn't change to a different method. If this is a method that's used for children who have problems and issues, why is it not a good way of teaching for everyone? The ones who have no problems will fly, and the ones that do have problems, they might need a little bit more time and input, but it's the same information, the same skills, the same knowledge that they need.
Mhm. And as both Sue and Sarah say, that you can highlight children who may need intervention pretty quick with the program, and that has to be a big bonus for all of us. So we have the 5 key skills, and many of you are familiar with these, but I'm not going to go into them too much, but say that they are integrated into mostly every lesson. Of course, the first few sounds that we do, we're not going to be doing as much blending and segmenting, and the tricky words come in later in the program. But these are our pillars of learning, aren't they, Sarah? So they are fundamentally in the program, and they'll be to a lesser or greater extent depending on what part of the lesson plan you are in, and that all the resources reflect the 5 key skills. But we're not going to focus on that today because we've got so much to do. But just have a quick look if you can. If you've got a teacher's book, you will see how everything is mapped out along to match the pupils book, which fit in with the steps of Jolly Classroom. So we have a wonderful range of decodable readers. And where do they start with? What do we start with, Sarah? Which ones?
Well, personally, I start with the little word books,
Yeah.
um, because one of the big things about Jolly Phonics, and I know Sue is really, really keen on this, is that we don't actually start books too soon. The children should actually have a level and skill of decoding words before you put them onto the readers, because if they
Mm,
can't do that, they can't read the books. So
yeah.
make sure your children actually can decode words, can sound them out, and can blend the words. If you've got the handbooks, we've got all the word boxes in there, and they get a really good grounding. If you haven't got the handbook, then as I say, if you start with the little word books, they're quite similar, but lots and lots of practice at just decoding words individually to begin with, and then move on to phrases and to sentences. Because as I say, we never want to give children something that we haven't taught them how to do or that they know how to do.
Mm,
Okay, so it's no good on the first day of school giving the child a book because you haven't taught them anything. You haven't taught them the sounds. You haven't taught them how to blend. What are they going to do with it? The only person who might read that book is a parent. They might read it to the child, which is lovely. We're all for reading to children. It develops vocabulary and comprehension, all sorts of other things. But actually, in terms of readers, there are a set of skills that the children need before we introduce readers to them.
yeah. And I think also there's that element of frustration if we give a child something they can't read. Um, and it's not the same as a picture storybook. So Sarah's given you some information about why we have a decodable reader. And as you can see on the slide, they do only use the letter sounds and the graphemes and the tricky words that have been taught. They may have short stories with nice illustrations, but it's very difficult to write a story only using the letter sounds and tricky words that our children have learned, isn't it, Sarah?
Much more difficult than you would think, but
Yeah.
I hope that we have achieved that. And also, obviously, because being early readers, they have pictures and illustrations. You can often sort of use those to help the story along and use that as part of it. Although obviously they need to read the words, but it
Yeah.
just it's experience.
And I think that another thing to mention is that we do have a focus sounds page, information page for teachers and parents to use. And also, if they have done tricky words, these are revised on the first cover. And there's a lot of information if these books are going home. But I think the most important thing on this slide is where it says the content builds up in the book as a new letter, sound, grapheme, or tricky words are taught. So, although to us, with our mastery skill of reading, we might think there's not a lot there, but as you will see as we go through this presentation, there's an awful lot that the children are doing that you may not be really mindful of at that moment. And Sarah, explain a little bit about this text.
Um, this is from the Department of Education core criteria that they put out, and it says that the what's in the readers that you give to children to read independently, it should match their stage of development. So we were talking about levels that the alternative spellings used, the tricky words used, wherever the children have covered, and that therefore they should be able to cope with the book. That's why fidelity to a scheme is very important, because obviously if you're using readers from our scheme, then you know that the two match. When people start mixing and matching schemes, then you can have problems, because decodable is not a definition of what's in the book. It says it's decodable, so the words can be decoded, but only if they've been taught that relevant information. So, that's what this is saying, that the children should know all the sound grapheme correspondences. But you can also have a small number of common exception words, which again you should have taught, and each program has their own set of words that they use. We have our 72 tricky words that we work through.
Yeah, and I think if you're familiar with using decodable readers, this makes a lot of sense, because there are differences. And this is one of the things that we are going to highlight now. What are the difference between standard readers and decodable readers? And we often get asked this question because standard readers may be your kind of like normal reading books that children have for pleasure. But the difference being is, with the standard book, they're going to have a problem with sounds they haven't encountered. Isn't that correct, Sarah?
Yes, and what we don't want to do is teach them something and then give them a book that doesn't reflect that, and then they're like, well, that doesn't work. I've sounded that word out, and I can't find the word, and that doesn't work. So what's the point of it? Or they can start guessing, because again, it doesn't match what they've been taught. We are going through a very careful process, teaching them in a very, regular, structured way. So why would we just then throw everything out the window and give them any old book? We want to give them a book that practices exactly those skills and that knowledge that we're teaching them.
Yeah, and the slide perfectly highlights why decodable readers work. And what we have there is the practice sound symbol mapping. I mean, they need to practice this apart from doing handwriting, apart from doing things in the workbooks or pupil books. They need to read. And this is where the decoding skill comes in. But also, there's a very important thing here, automatic word recognition, Sarah. Why is this important?
Well, I mean, initially, when children are learning to blend words, what we do is ask them to sound the word out. So whatever it might be, at, blend the word cat. And then, you do your other words and things. But that's not what a fluent reader eventually goes on to do. So what we want is for those words to be known by the child. So we encourage them eventually to sound it silently in their head and then just say the word. But as the words become more familiar to the children, they will recognize them automatically. They won't have to blend them out. Although there is research which does actually say that that is the case, even though you don't realize it and you don't know it, because we can now do brilliant things with tracking on the brain and where things are happening. Um, they do say that actually, even when you look at a word, automatically recognize it, that actually in your brain has done all this stuff that you're just not aware of and
Mm.
has actually blended that word, but instantaneous in your head. Because obviously what we want eventually is to have fluent, independent readers who just read the page in front of them. You know, sounding out and decoding is absolutely fine. We need them to do it loud. We need to see what's going on in the early stages, but eventually we need to move on, as I say, so they can just read fluently.
Yeah. And I think also what we do recognize is that children do have standard readings. A lot of their school books may be like this, but by the time they get to using school books, they generally have a bit of a structure in place, don't they, Sarah? That they have knowledge of sounds, how things are coming, and they can also rely on what we have here. There's a heavy dependency on picture cues and context cues and a lot of guessing. And we don't want that. We want children to be secure in their choices. So building up fluency helps them read and not having to stop to remember if that is a but or a duh. And those alternatives, which one is it and what does it sound like? But at some point, though, children make the transition to standard readers with enough information, don't they, Sarah?
Yes, you know, once children have a certain level of ability, both in blending and knowledge of sounds and graphemes and things, you know, English unfortunately isn't a regular language. Even right from the beginning, there's a lot of tweaking, is the official term for it. You know, we sound out doctor, but we know the word doctor, so we put that schwa in. You know, if a word is in a child's vocabulary, then they will, you know, make these tweaks automatically. And actually, they cope with an awful lot of things that we might not give them credit for. But once they've got to a certain level of proficiency, then they can tackle, you know, most things that are age appropriate.
So, Sarah, I'm going to hand this over to you because you do an excellent explanation about why decodable readers work. So, this is a very interesting part of the presentation. So, go ahead, Sarah.
Right. So if this is our reader and this is the first page, I can see a red car. Okay, I is a tricky word. We learned that first in Jolly Phonics. So that shouldn't be a problem. And actually can see a red car, all perfectly decodable regular words. So that's not too much of a problem. And the picture is nice and graphic. So I can see a red car. That's lovely. They turn the page over. And here we have right now, same thing again. I can see a green car. And again, beautifully illustrated. All those words are regular, but it's the same sentence again. So it's slightly boring. You know, I don't read a book that has the same sentence, but only with one word changed in each of them. So we turn the page over. I can see an aura oh, I don't know that word. I'll just look at the picture. That'll be fine. Yeah, I can see an orange car. Okay. I've not read that word. What I've done is I've thought, I don't know it. I can't blend it. What am I going to do? I'm going to look at the picture and I'm going to fill the word in from there. So I'm not practicing my phonics skills. I'm not practicing the things that I've done. And what I've learned is I can't always read the word. Which, as I say, we're not always going to have a picture because we do eventually move on to books that don't have pictures. So we do need to really read the words and not rely on pictures to give us a clue. And what you find is that if you take those words out of context, out of the sentences, red and green, say regular, they'd probably be all right with, but orange wouldn't have a clue, wouldn't be able to do it because they were actually reading the picture. They weren't reading the word. So we need to make sure, as I say, that the words we're giving them and asking them to read, they can actually manage. And as I say, with pictures, if we go on to the next, right, and then you say to them, okay, next page. And because they've been so used to it, what you get is, oh, I can see the green car, I can see the grey car, I can see they've just gone into this sort of automatic pilot because that's what they've been led to believe by the previous pages. I can see that, and you just fill it in. So actually, what this page says
Right.
is they are stuck in a traffic jam. Okay, nothing to do with
Mhm.
I can see anything at all. Again, they and are a tricky words. We teach them fairly early on. The rest of the words are perfectly regular. They can read the word, but if they've got used to guessing from the picture and repeating that sentence, again, we want them to actually read the words on the page and not just regurgitate a sentence and change a single word according to a picture, because as I say, after a while, it simply doesn't work.
Yeah.
So again, they turn the page. I can see a truck. I can see a white lorry. You could get any number of answers from this from children who are just guessing because they've got used to looking at the picture and thinking, oh yeah, I just say what I can see in the picture. And if we actually do see the words, okay, there is a huge white truck. Again, we've got problems. They can't do early on at this very, very early stage that we're talking about, the soft G, the G followed by an E making a J sound in huge. The U in huge is a long vowel sound. That's not the alternative we've taught them. Same in white with the I hop over E. So we need to be very careful when we're giving children books that we make sure that the phonic content of the words is exactly the same as that we have taught them. And if it's not, actually, it's not going to make sense to the children. It's just going to be like little squiggles on the page, because they don't know what it means because they haven't been taught what it means. So this is why we have decodable readers, so that we make sure that every word in there is capable of being decoded by the child at that particular stage. Yes, do lots of other reading round and about with them, to them, but for their actual decodable readers, it must be decodable for that child at that moment in time. Because, as the next slide says, there is no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the fact that you can't read the words. So if you can't read the words, if you can't get the words off the page, all they're doing is just telling you what they can see in pictures. They are not reading. And so, as we've already said, we want them reading the words. We don't want them looking at pictures. Pictures are nice, pictures add, but that's not what we're teaching them. We're teaching them to read the words, because if they go on to be anything at all, doctors, lawyers, whatever, teachers, we will have books, lots of books, no pictures.
And this is where the decodables can also be a great way to act as an evaluation and assessment. I know we have Jolly assessments, which Jen and Sarah worked on together, but also reading the books as we move on in this presentation, you will see there's a lot of value in having a decodable readers as part of your lesson or in your literacy hour. It's very hard sometimes for teachers to get reading into their classroom, isn't it, Sarah, during that condensed time we have now?
Well, teachers are always short on time.
Mm,
We have large classes. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have teaching assistants, not always. But I have to say, I always believe hearing children read individually is a very powerful way to, encourage them and to monitor their reading. Lovely if parents can help, not always necessarily the case. But even so, you as a teacher need to be aware of each child, what they're up to, where their standard, what standard they're up to. And you can really only do that by hearing them read.
Mm. And I think on this side, the one thing that really comes out here is using decodables that don't match phonics instruction. And this does happen because when a school takes on Jolly Phonics, they may have decodables that have come from another program. And it is sometimes possible to use these books if the children know the letter sounds. But again, introducing books where children haven't done those letter sounds can be terribly confusing, can't it, Sarah?
Yeah, and as a teacher, you have a certain level of professionalism, and you should be able to have a look at a book and think, that's not got the right sounds in, that's too difficult. You can always teach a little extra something if you really need to. If you're stuffed with all these books and they teach, I don't know, I as IGH rather than IE, put a little bit of extra teaching in, a little bit of extra practice in, and then, those books then become usable. But you do need to be very, very careful. And I say, use your professional judgment. But, too many words that are not within the child's ability, and you turn them off reading, it's very frustrating. As I say, they move to guessing, and that's really not what we want.
No,
I think this
because,
might be a good time to just add in a couple of questions that I've
oh,
been
yes,
fielding.
please. Yeah, go for
There's
it then.
been quite a lot of wondering about levels, which I'm sure you're going to go into later. So I'll save those questions for later. But there's, I think, a little bit of a confusion, and you've kind of addressed it, but maybe you could reinforce it about the difference between decodable readers and just standard readers, like just normal, what do they call it? Let me just look again.
Well, I can give you a kind of
Yeah, just
explanation here. I
standard
mean,
readers, they call it
yeah.
decodable and standard readers.
Yeah, I mean, you can get reading books for children which are, something like the Gruffalo is a standard reader, isn't it, Sarah? It's using language, it's using ordinary. It's not a structured, decodable reader in that the children are using sounds that they have learned for that blending and segmenting. And storybooks are often aimed at a higher level because children are listening to these stories to be told to them. But sometimes you can have older children, and if you give them a book like Horrible Histories or Hieronymo Stilton and things like that, they may have words in that the children haven't even done, like tricky words. So it can be really confusing for them, can't it, Sarah?
Yeah. Books that are written for children, children's books like, that win the Nobel Prize for Literature and things, they're written as storybooks. They're written as stories, for children at an age, um, mostly either to be told or read to children because they're using, any word, any spelling alternative. And so they're lovely, they're great, fantastic for comprehension and vocabulary if you're reading them to your children in your class and things. But as I say, if you're asking a child to do the reading, then you need to make sure that all the words in that book are composed of graphemes that you've taught them, tricky words that you've taught them, and that's what makes it a decodable reader. It's decodable to the standard that the child is at that moment in time. Other
Mm.
book readers, children's readers, standard other thing. They're nice stories for children, but they're not written specifically for them to read independently.
No, and a lot of them, like the storybooks that we're talking about, have a lot of visual clues. The visuals far outweigh the writing because children are using all of these cueing systems to make sense of what they're hearing. But that a standard book is what you and I would look at in a shop and be able to read. And sometimes these are presented to young children as reading for their reading skills, and they can't. They immediately fail, don't they, Sarah? It's too much.
Yeah, I can think of children's books. It might have elephants in it or something, which has got the PH saying F. That's not what we teach at that stage. It might be one sentence on the page. It might be lovely. As I say, fantastic story, but that word is not decodable to the child, so therefore that's not a decodable reader.
No. And as you can see with the scheme, I mean, the wonderful inclusion of the folk tales is allowing children not only to explore the skills that they have, they're building up their vocabulary as well. And what we encourage our children to talk about it, what they see and what they've heard. So they are revising the 42 sounds and the alternatives, But what we are doing is giving them that life skill of being able to put all that together in a structured way to be able to read. And often, if you are looking from the child's point of view, one sentence is often enough when you're putting all those skills together. You're blending, you're segmenting, you're, you know, thinking about the shape of the letter and the sound it makes and how it all goes together. Building up those skills from like a phrase to a sentence is enough, isn't it, Sarah? It's really enough.
Yes, if you imagine, you're back at age 4, 5, whatever it is, and you're learning to read. What might be considered boring to you as an adult, because you can do that easily, it's absolutely amazing, for a small child, sometimes even to read a word, because
Mm,
it's a new experience, it's a new skill for them. And, their parent, their teacher, whoever is telling them how marvelous and great and lovely they are, which is true, huge sense of satisfaction and achievement because they are the ones doing the reading. This is what I always say if I have parents who come in who, really want a reading book on the first day and things. And I say, no, we give them the sound books because actually at this moment in time, what you're concentrating on is learning the sounds. And how fantastic is it going to be when the first time they bring that book home to you, they can read that book. You're not
mm.
reading it to them. They're going to read that book to you because they're being given that point at the book. They have that knowledge, skill, and ability.
Mm. And it's just a quick thing I thought about here is the importance of also dictation, because dictation, the children are reading that as well. As that they write it and then they read it and then they can say it. I mean, there's so much in the program for children to practice their reading skills. I mean, we take a lot for granted as we get older and we can easily put it all together. But we've got to remember, how did we get there? How did we get children there? And as you can see the range here, that we don't have the pink readers in here. And often we get asked what are the difference. And as you can see, it really gives you a mapped out plan here of the pages, the tricky words, the new alternatives. And where do the new pink ones fit in here, Sarah?
Between the little word books and the orange level, well, orange red level, really.
Yeah.
Um, they're quite small books. Um, in many schemes, they say, here is, at this stage, on this week, at this lesson, you give the children this book. We're not that prescriptive because we genuinely believe, and our experience is, that children develop their blending and understanding at different uh, ages and stages, and that not everyone should be on the same book. Not everyone in a class should be on the same book at the same time, because actually that's not going to be a reflection of where they're up to. Some will find it very easy, some will struggle more. Actually, nothing to do with intelligence. I've known very intelligent children who, struggled with blending, but once they've got it, because we put in, lots more hard work and things, they're fine and they're off and, no problem at all. But we try and start them off and don't move them up the levels too quickly, because again, if the understanding isn't there, the comprehension isn't there, um, then they're not really understanding what they're reading, and that is part of reading. So
Mm.
lots of things as a teacher you need to be evaluating.
And at the bottom of this, you'll see the closest book band. Now, we do update this because just like we introduce a new color, they may introduce a new color. That does give you some idea of where they fit generally with book bands. And we don't say they're age appropriate, do we? Because we know that somebody might invest in starting the program. A teacher might use the program with children from 6 years upwards or others from 4 years upwards. So that's the beauty of the books being able to be adaptable to when you start the program and the ability of the children. But one thing I would say is if children are racing through, for example, the pink level, don't pop them onto the orange level until they have done the sounds and the tricky words, just because they're reading one level really quickly. And this is often a mistake, isn't it, Sarah?
Well, that's what I say. We're Sue and myself are both very keen, and we think part of the power of Jolly Phonics is the fact that they're not introduced to reading books too early.
Yeah.
That they have a huge amount of practice developing the skill of blending just on individual words. And then when they get to the book, it's a very easy transition and process, and enjoyable, no frustration, because we know they can do it.
Yeah. And I think I'm going through all that process again with my grandson, where I'm realizing you don't rush it. There needs to be so much foundational work put in so that there is that differentiate. They can understand the pace. And then when they're ready for reading, it just is like a wow moment. So, what can we do with decodable readers? Because Sarah and I know that there's so many things you could do with them. They're just not a reading book, are they, Sarah? And what we do know is from the five key skills that blending is one of the top things that we do. And how are they using their blending skills, Sarah, while they're reading the decodables?
Well, obviously, that's the most closest skill to what we're talking about with readers. That they are sounding the words out. They're blending those sounds to make the words. It's a good idea after if they're sounding lots of words out in a sentence. When they've read the sentence once, make them go back and then read the whole sentence again without sounding out, because that helps with fluency. Um, if they've got a particular word they've had trouble with, again, go over it, have another little look, make sure they know how to do that. Eventually, we don't want them to be sounding out every word. So eventually, when you know that they are, fluent and confident blenders, you ask them to blend the word in their head and to just tell you the word. So again, we develop fluency through the readers and how we use them. We don't want to move on to that too quickly, but as I say, age 7, we don't still want them decoding every word out aloud. And they need to move on and move through in these skills and how they learn to read. So there's obviously the blending, and the reading is number one for decodable readers, as you would expect.
And what we know is that if, as Sarah said, just to reinforce that, as you see on the slide, trying to decode unfamiliar phonic patterns, blending falls apart. So, we're removing that extra load from the child in them being able to do something we know they can do, because building that confidence also builds up the speed and fluency that we want to help children. So they're putting their sounds together smoothly. It's as simple as that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, talking
And
to them about what they're reading develops vocabulary and comprehension. And they say the biggest thing to increase vocabulary is reading. The more reading a child does, the bigger vocabulary they'll have. And obviously, if you're talking to them about what they're reading, asking them questions, then you're developing their comprehension at the same time, because we need all these bits coming together. We don't just want them to sound the words out, and then, I mean, I've known children, and they'll say, whatever it is, I can see a red car, and you say, what does it say? And they just go, I don't know, because they haven't got that sort of extra bit of processing. But you can develop that and talk about it and make sure they do understand what they've read, and that they're not just telling you the words without any understanding there.
well, I'm hoping this video plays, but there's a good selection of standard readers there in this image there, and you can see on that story. And these are very young children. We're not looking at this clip, but you can see they have the books really to build up that curiosity with print. So I'm just hoping this video works now.
Fix.
What's this again? Let's try this again.
E. E. Vixen.
Vixen. That's a tricky one. Should we try it again?
Yeah.
Do it again.
E. Vixen.
Vixen. That's it. Okay.
Please.
What's this one again? Sorry, Jashika.
E. Vixen. Vixen
Okay.
has E.
What's this sound?
E.
Yes. Let's try again.
E. Freed. B. Scrubs.
I love this picture. I mean, I love this video because when we went to this school, this little girl had only been learning English for a year. a year, and she's coming up to 5. But Sarah, what we can see in there, she's using all her strategies, isn't she, of what she can see. And we didn't, it hasn't got fox in there, it's got vixen. So she can't use the image as a cue, really, can she, to help decode? She has to use her skills.
Yeah, and as you can see, the teacher is, helping her and encouraging her, and helping with the pronunciation of the word, because obviously Vixen has got that schwa at the end. So many of our English two-syllable or more words have somewhere along the line. So again, it's all these little things that we need, all these strategies and knowledge and ability, for children to become proficient readers.
And we did touch on earlier about listening to children read, but also giving them a space to have independent reading. Because sometimes I remember with the little finger phonics books, children weren't really reading everything in that, but they wanted that time to digest all the illustrations in that and build up that curiosity with print. So independent reading is a great way for children to do it in their own time with their own space. And what it does is grow a lot of background knowledge when they're able to use it as a tool for comprehension. Isn't that correct, Sarah?
Yeah. As I say, the biggest thing to give vocab, if you imagine how many words you use in a day, it's not actually that many. When would that little girl have come across the word vixen in the normal course of a day? Probably not. Possibly if they were studying Foxy, shall I say, but that might have been one day, one afternoon, 1 hour, a word in one lesson. But in that book, it might come up a couple of times. She's got that book she can always go back to. So books absolutely broaden your vocabulary, your knowledge, your general knowledge, all sorts of other things. And again, if children are interested in it, they will want to read these books. I can remember we would have children who'd read to a partner or to other children because they wanted to, not because they were told to, because they enjoyed reading it, and then they were telling the other children about it, which again really brings on their speaking, their listening, their vocabulary, their comprehension. It's quite amazing what one little book can do.
It also builds up reading stamina so that you can read for longer, which is a really important thing if you're having to study for exams and things like that later on. So it's laying that foundation down for that skill as well. And also, when we look about, I just pop this in here about spelling and dictation and everything, reading is also a way that we can add to our evaluations and assessments because if a child is spending a lot of time blending or decoding when they're reading, Sarah, what does that tell us that we need to flag up in order to go back to our assessments?
Well, obviously, the children need to have a very good and immediate knowledge of the sounds. If they're blending the word leg, le,
Oh,
Oh,
we've
oh
lost
dear.
Sarah. Well, what I'll fill in for her while we get her back is that if the children aren't assessed regularly to make sure that they are understanding things like alternatives and also how spelling patterns are, we cannot gauge how they're reading that well. So one of the things about having regular assessments, and Jen here has put this package together for us with the Jolly assessments, is a way that we can regularly look at their reading skills, decoding skills, and also writing skills. And I'll talk to you a little bit later on about what we're going to do for you with Jolly assessments. But also, we have the spelling and dictation sentences, which you can reverse around. You can get the children to write, but also they are reading. So I'm going to get you now to join in with us because we've been talking about decodable readers and how you use them, and that they can be used with different ages, but also we can use them in different ways. But how many skills are being used in decodable readers? Hi, you're back. So, how many skills are being used
Right,
in
cut out.
decodable readers? You're just keeping us on our toes, Sarah. So we're asking you to pop in the chat, how many skills do you think you can use in the decodable readers? So we're really enjoying that you're taking all of this in, and now we're asking you to participate a little bit so we can understand what you use the decodables for. So Jen, if there's anything coming up in the chat, that would be great. I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat myself and
Yeah.
see
I've
how
actually been
many
answering lots of
skills.
questions, and we do have quite a few questions. Are you ready for some questions?
Well, I just want to ask, see what people are saying about how many skills. Four. No, I want you to name them. You can't just put a number. I want you to name them, not how
That's
many
just guessing,
skills.
isn't it?
Name them. Ah, they're five. People are saying five, six, five, six. Right, here we go. Pictures, orientation, listening, visual aids. What else? Picture. Well, we're not looking at the pictures too much. Children can't blend even knowing the sounds. How can we help them? Oh, that's a big question. Okay. So sound, listening, segmenting, tricky words. Well done. Enjoyment, segmenting. Okay. So we're getting quite a few similar responses here and five skills. So what I'll do, Jen, if you don't mind, is I'll just respond to this one and then we'll quickly go into the questions if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you may be surprised to know that there's a big wow moment here in that we can use them for all of these things here. As you can see, grapheme recognition, they're looking at the letter shapes and also blending for reading and segmenting for spelling. So we're getting back to that. How do we use the decodables for spelling? Because they're seeing spelling structures that have been taught to them, aren't they, Sarah?
That's
So
right.
it's not specifically spelling. Sorry.
Most, most good decodable readers should somewhere, we have them on the front inside cover. It has the new graphemes, the new alternatives that are being introduced in that level. And you can go over those before you read the book to make sure the children know and understand them.
Yeah. So we've got, these couple of things here that some of you have pointed out with segmenting, and we've also got this as well. We're looking at the tracking from left to right, the sentence level fluency, basic comprehension. Okay, we've talked about the tricky words, but also, how they're using all of these. Where are you listening for all of these? Also, awareness of punctuation, exclamation marks, intonation if they're speaking, if they're reading out loud. These are all important things, aren't they, Sarah?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
And
you can
no
see there's a lot of skills involved. And Sarah and I often would do activities where we would show you how that the decodable readers can be used for creative writing. Well, that's another thing that we will do. But most importantly, what you are seeing is that you don't dismiss the reading book you pick up with one little sentence on each page and say, what are my children are going to do with that? What you can see is they are multitasking using so many different skills. It's an impressive thing that we often forget. And also, can the books be used with can children use higher levels? Well, Sarah touched on this where she said only if they've mastered the patterns. And also, it is about confidence and also reading. If they're not reading with accuracy, it's not good for you to just bump them up the levels. I'm aware that we have questions, so I'm going to go straight into the questions, Jen, so that we can answer a
Yeah.
few.
I think the main question that I think we could really dive a little deeper on is if you could go back to that page where you've got the decodable colored readers on there, because
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a misunderstanding or confusion surrounding where do you start? What color level do you start at? And how are you making the decision of when to move a child up? And again, just remembering that there is a pink level that's not on this chart. So perhaps, Sarah, if you could explain a little bit about where you would start and how would you make decisions about when to move children up and whether or not you would be skipping levels? How would you make those decisions?
I would start on the little word books because they have sound practice and individual word practice, moving on to phrases. If you have a child that's really struggling with blending, they need more practice. So actually, if they were struggling I would use the read and see. But if a child is blending fluently, then they don't need to go through all the read and see books. Then they can move on to the pink level. But again, if they're really fluent, then you could put them straight onto red. But again, you as a teacher have to make decisions. You have to understand your children. If they're not understanding what they're reading, make sure they read all the pinks and possibly all the oranges before you move them on to the red. But if they're, one of these children that find it really easy and they know exactly what they're reading, move them from pink to red, and they should be able to just progress on after that. I would go through the red, yellow, green, blue, and purple levels without missing a level. I wouldn't miss a level at that point, but it's where you start them that can be slightly different, because as we've already said, you will have and we've had questions. There are children who struggle with blending initially. They will get it, and they do get there, but there's no point moving them up to red or yellow level where they're supposed to be reading sentences when they're struggling to read a word. Get lots of practice in blending. And actually, again, some children will just fly all the way through. Some will level off at certain times and then have another little spurt and it will be fine. Some of them will start really slowly and you think, oh my goodness me, are they ever going to get there and make it? And then one day, for whatever reason, and I don't know what it is, the penny drops and off they fly. And after that, they're absolutely, fine. But to begin with, you do need to use your judgment as a teacher. And if they can't blend words, don't give them books with sentences in it. Give them books with words in.
So it sounds like to me what you're saying is starting off with word-based, which are the first two levels, the little word books and the read and see. So start there. And then
Yeah.
once they can do blending well, then they're ready for sentences. And sentences start with orange and up. Would you say that's correct?
You should be doing blending all the while you're teaching the sounds, or there's words associated that are given. As I say, if you've got the handbook, you've got the word boxes, which are just brilliant for encouraging and practicing blending. If they've blended successfully, like 180 odd words, actually, when they get to the reading books are easy. They fly. So, as I say, don't start them too early. This is one of the big things. You start them too early, they struggle. Reading isn't a pleasure. You haven't got enough books to put them through because you started them too early. They haven't got the skills. You get to the end of the little word books or the pink. What do you do with them? Because they can't read a sentence. So, be very, very careful, and do match the reader to the child, and the children will all be different, which is why we don't say in week 12, start all of them on a little word book, because they won't all be ready for it.
No. So would you say, Sarah, would you say orange, pink, and red are all similar level wise, but
Uh,
there are slight differences between them? And could you explain a little more about those three, the orange, pink, and red?
well, the pink have words or phrases mostly. And they use the basic 42 sounds and just a few of the tricky words that get built up. The orange level have a similar sort of structure. They go through the basic 42 sounds and they use more of the tricky words that we've got. They do have sentences and they do have longer words in them by the time you get to the top end of the orange readers. But then you get onto the red level readers, they have a sentence per page. They use the first 12 tricky words, and all the words in them are made up of the 42 basic sounds that we have. So it's a building up of the tricky words. It's a building up of the length and the complexity of the words within them, and phrases, and building up to sentences.
Okay.
It's also good to mention that the upper ones, we also have non-fiction books as well, which is really important for our readers. And getting back to the little books, using them, I'd say with my grandson who's coming up to 4, he often goes back to segmenting as he is developing his blending. And that is the hardest skill when they're that little, isn't it, Sarah? When they're so little, they can segment beautifully, but blending is such a challenge. So he goes back to familiar resource of the little word books to just sit and practice himself. So they do have a value. You look at them and you think, well, what would that child do with that? That segmenting and also finger tracking and putting it together as blending is setting you up for all the other levels. So Jen, another
Yeah,
question?
I'm just looking through the questions now.
Mhm.
So, another question is, what happens to those children with when they still can't read fluently after all of the stages?
But
What would you do if you had a child that was struggling to read fluently?
I'm not sure what the definition of fluently is really. Um,
Yeah,
some
yeah.
children take longer. Some people have more practice, they do take more practice, and you will need to make them sound out words and listen to them longer to make sure they get there. But it is practice, in any skill, when you practice it, that is when you get better. Um, you know, my fear when people say things that to me is that actually the sounds haven't been taught securely.
Mm.
Blending hasn't been taught securely. You haven't practiced enough blending words before you've put them onto a book. By the time they get onto a book, they're sidetracked by the picture, they're sidetracked by the story. Parents are very keen that they want to, get them onto the next book and read them up the level. I think some of that is the fact that they've possibly been moved along too quickly. And not enough of the basic practice has been put in. But again, you just got to read individually with that child and encourage them. If they're sounding out too many words, as I say, in their head voice, in their inside head voice, just tell me the word. Again, that helps to read fluency. Repeat the sentence and get them to repeat the sentence with you after you've read it. So again, you're not constantly breaking it up because of the blending and the sounding. It's hard work, but you get there by repeating the things you should be doing.
I
So
think
we have two people who have asked about, they say that they have the issue where a child can read, that's not the problem, but they're struggling with the writing. So when a word or a sentence is dictated, it's very difficult for them to write.
I would say probably, in my experience, the basic problem is we spend an awful lot of time with flashcards, holding them up and getting the children to go, s, a, t, I, p, whatever it is. And they get very, very good at that. And we give them to those in words. They get lots of practice of that. And then we say, right now, segment the word s, I, t, and they do that. And then you ask them to write it down. And that actually is where often there is a gap, and they'll go, how do you write that? Oh, I look on the wall, wherever it might be, and they try and find it. They need to be as quick at hearing the sound and writing the correct letter or letters for it as they do for seeing the sound and saying the sound that it makes. So right from the beginning, when I'm teaching sounds, when I'm teaching atta right at the beginning, I will dictate, I will call out sounds, and I will ask the children to write them down on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, with chalk, on their hands, however it might be. I will call out sounds, they write it down. And then when you progress on to segmenting words, and you do lots of practice, we count, if we've got k, atta, we've got three sounds, we need three letters. We can build them with magnetic levels, all those sorts of things. But I bet your bottom dollar that what they are bad at is if they call the sound out, they will not be writing the correct grapheme with automaticity, which is what we need. So I would suggest they test the child on that, see if when they call a sound out, they're writing it down immediately. If that's the case, then it's to do with sounding out, segmenting the word. Again, lots of practice. You can ask them to say the word slowly. If it's, I know, bird, bird, like your batteries are running down. Lots of things like that you can do. Missing sounds. So again, they get used to segmenting things out. But again, it's practice. It's finding out which is that real skill they're struggling with, and then practicing that. But as I say, often that's what I find. People tell me they do jolly phonics, but actually what they do is they teach 42 sounds and they teach them to read, but they're not doing that alternative side, which is the reading. And they're two sides of the same coin. We read the words by decoding the letters, the code, which are the symbols on the page, but to encode them, it's just the same skills, but in reverse, really. So you've got to teach both.
I think this
Perfect.
is where going back to dictation, I keep going on about dictation. Dictation is such an important thing. And children, at first, it does take them a bit of time, but then they speed up, but they need to practice. Otherwise, they don't get the letter formation, the sounds, and there's no correlation with what sounds are in that word. Now, as we're coming to the end of the session, I'm just going to ask Jen very quickly to give us a little overview of her session on March the 18th about Jolly assessments. Jen.
Yep. So on the 18th, we're going to have a session about assessments, how to do them, and how to get into Jolly Classroom and do assessments, but also how to analyze the results of the assessments and how to reassess pupils. Also, we'll touch on the phonics screen check. We have just included 5 more phonics screen checks into the assessments platform. So initially there was only one, and now there's 6 in total. So we'll briefly touch on that. And it's not just valuable for our UK teachers who have the phonics screen check, it's also valuable for other pupils, for other teachers globally. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in that session.
Okay. And look out for further sessions with Sarah and myself, where we will be exploring many different topics. And we're really delighted you joined with us today. And there are no certificates, as we mentioned at the beginning, because the administrative task in giving out 1,000 certificates per webinar is enormous. But then we hope you join us for our CPD courses that we will be running. So everybody, let's have an emoji at the end of the session to see how you're feeling. It's a lot of information that we've sent you, but please send us a little emoji so that we can check out how you're feeling and if you've enjoyed the session. And please let us know if you have any queries or if there's anything you wish to know. But more than anything, check out the books on the website. Have a look. You can see pages. There's samples of the pages and also more information about the topics in the books that are fantasy and also non-fiction. Look at all these emojis. Wonderful. So it's goodbye from me. And ladies,
And it's goodbye from me.
and
Thank you so
Jen.
much, guys. And I hope we tried our best to answer all your questions. And if not, you can always email us to ask for more support after the session.
Okay, and it was lovely as always, and we really appreciate you dropping in to being with us. So we'll say bye for now. So looking forward to seeing you on the 18th. Bye for now. Bye.